So I'll give you just a really quick history lesson at this point about the period that I study. It's called the early modern period. So this is roughly from about 1450 to about 1700. Historians, will quibble about dates and that era, the Renaissance, the Reformation, the witch hunts, and the scientific revolution. And I teach courses on all of those topics. It was a time of great change and accelerating change, which is also, I think, quite important and gives me and my students lots to talk about. So studying history is traveling in a way. It is time traveling. So that same interest that fueled my interest when I crossed the ocean also kind of fuels my interest going back in time. And the further back in time we go, kind of the more foreign our experience becomes to us. So if we could time travel back to around the year 1490, we would see that here we're talking about kind of a moderately educated European person, which would be a very small minority. But they only believed that there were 3 continents. Columbus had not yet sailed the ocean, and at that point, they believed that the sun and the moon all revolved around the earth. They believed the human body was made up of 4 humors. They believed that if a plant looked like a part of the body, you could use it to heal that body part. And they also believed that everything that could be known had been discovered already by people like Plato and Aristotle, the Greek philosophers. People also assumed that society was naturally hierarchical with a king and nobility and peasants. It was assumed by everyone that men were superior to women, that men were born to rule, and that women's place was to be subservient to their fathers and their husbands. And in my women and genders history courses, we unpack that a little bit. By around 1550, and this was a really interesting time, there was kind of a period of collective fear and panic known as the European witch hunts. And the most popular class I teach is the one on the witch hunts. When European society as a whole became convinced that the devil was everywhere, demons could invade their thoughts and their bodies, and that women were in league with the devil and were casting spells on people and causing illnesses and all kinds of harm. And again, the European witch hunts, again, are one of those periods that is so strange that we're kind of compelled to try and figure out what was going on and what was going on. But here's what's kind of interesting about it. All of that sounds very different from our world. But one thing that my students and I talk about is, was it really all that different? One thing that was going on in early modern Europe was that society was going through rapid change, and rapid change due to the access to information that they had. In the Middle Ages, before the period I study, books did not exist. The only books that existed were the ones that were written out by hand by medieval monks. But with the invention of the printing press around 1450, everything changed. Access to information became much more available. That had some really great effects. More more people could read, more people were questioning some of those assumptions about society. Like maybe it doesn't have to be hierarchical, maybe there are other ways to organize society. So once people had access to information, they started questioning everything. Is the Pope really the head of the church? Are men really superior to women? And it was access to information that actually fueled the change of the Reformation and the scientific revolution, which, we don't have time to talk about, but, takes us into something that looks more modern and more familiar to us. But this was the thing, those printed books, that new technology was also what fueled the witch hunts. So people had access to exciting new information. They also had access to bizarro propaganda and hate literature and people who were manipulating their fears and hatred. So again, maybe this is starting to sound like it's not actually all that different, that it's more familiar than we might like to think. In many ways, we are very different from people who lived 500 years ago, but in other ways, we're not all that different. And my students and I look at things like, the impact of the printing press in the 16th century and the impact of the internet in the 21st century. And again, any news you look at, we're reminded that having access to information is amazing, but if it's misinformation, it can be problematic, and technology can be used for good or used to manipulate and exploit and deceive people. So, these are the kinds of things that my students and I talk about in my history classes. It's history is about learning about the past, obviously, but it's also about learning about what we might call the human condition and learning about ourselves. History is more than anything else kind of a dialogue between the past and the present. And then finally, I guess I would say, like almost every course in the liberal arts, what we learn in a history class is to see the world from other people's perspectives and to try and imagine what it's like to live in somebody else's shoes. And I really encourage my students to use their imagination, right? To think about, again, what is it like to believe that a demon might be sitting on your shoulder, right? Like that's maybe a bad example. Don't worry about that. Don't imagine that. The past isn't all the bad stuff. I mean, you can also look at why was the Renaissance such a creative period in European history, and how do societies, become creative and musical? Why do some cultures have renaissances and others don't, right? So there's all kinds of interesting things. I think the more we know about the history, the more we understand about how societies work, how cultures work, what happens when, well, again, society breaks down in fundamental ways. So yeah, historians wouldn't say it repeats itself exactly in any way, because, situations and times and cultures are always changing. But I guess what I would say is that what we can learn from the past helps us understand the present.